Perfect. So hopefully everyone can clearly see my screen. So let's go back on a higher time frame on gold. So first things first. Again, I'm not going to start explaining how I read structure. A lot of the people that are in here that have been here for a while understand all of that. So I'm not really going to cover that. I'm just going to kind of go through my analysis and what I see on gold and how I've been seeing the gold market go. So for me, really, what happened with gold going back from 2009 is the last break of structure that we had was over here. Now, the last pullback that we got was here, and then we had this huge expansion to the top side. So, this entire move here was our next bullish move to the top side. Now, within this, we obviously had a trend, but predominantly, this was our big swing move to the top side. Now, after this played out, what did we get? After a break of structure, what can we expect? We can expect a retracement, which was this move here. Now, if I use my Fibonacci tool from the low to the high, you could perfectly see price pulled back into that 70 to 79% area that I look for. And we can perfectly see price was printing lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. Pullback complete, had a change of character, and then away we went to the top side. So this was our pullback region. Once this happened here, what were we expecting? We were then I was then expecting price eventually to take out this high because this is classified as a weak high in an uptrend because we're expecting the previous high to get broken after the pullback is complete, and this should act as a strong low once we've had a change of character here because the pullback is complete and now we're expecting price to continue higher. Now you could see that's exactly what happened. Price came above here and we had a break of structure here. Now, once we got a break of structure here, what could we anticipate? Similar scenario, guys. Like we could anticipate again. So if this is our next major swing leg to the top side, now again, if we sit within this, just the way we were mapping out structure, we can clearly see we had a higher high, higher low. Now, this is kind of an equal high here, and we had a higher low here. And then we had this big expansion to the top side here, and this was the last retracement before we got this push to the top side. So we know overall gold has been bullish. We can see that price had a break of structure just over here. We can see structure was intact as it was coming up here. But once we get that break of structure, what can we anticipate again? We can anticipate a pullback, right? So we can anticipate price to eventually head lower. Now, I'm not going to start calling that and saying price is heading down over here until we don't get any structural shifts. Until that doesn't happen, we cannot factor that and expect that. There is a high probability that that can happen because price has fulfilled its objective in an uptrend, which is to have a break of structure. Once it has a break of structure, whether it's a minor breaker structure, or whether it's a huge breaker structure, the main objective of structure in an uptrend is to have a break. Once that break happens, we can expect that retracement. So we can see we've had this huge expansion, we had that breaker structure, but within this entire move, within this expansion of a leg to the top side, where is the most significant structure that we need to look at in order for us to have any kind of understanding of where price is, what price is doing, or where can it kind of head towards. So like I said, the last pullback that we had got was this pullback here, and then we had this huge expansion here. So for me, now again, everyone might have a different perspective of how they read the market, and that's perfectly fine. But for me, this was the last low that caused this previous high to break and created this new high within this swing structure that caused the major swing to break. So now looking at price, it's achieved its main objective, which is creating a swing structure to the top side in this uptrend. But what are we now looking at? Now our range that we're working with from a weekly time frame is this is our higher low and this is our higher high. Now, for me, and again, it's me personally, the way I see structure on a higher time frame, price must close above a previous structure in order for it to be a break. And you can clearly see price has not closed above this previous high over here. So we have not created a high and we have not created a low. So when price creates this low and creates this high, everything within here is internal. All of this structure is internal. Why? Because nothing has broken the swing low and nothing has broken the swing high. So when we originally started to pull back here, you could see all of this price action was a pullback from our swing structure, which was our swing low and our swing high. So now if we mark our fib tool, I'm just going to delete these lines here. You could see here is our low point, there is our high point. Now you could perfectly see what price did was price started to retrace here, started to build liquidity, never fully mitigated our area of discount, and you could clearly see to the left here we have this area of imbalance and we have this unmitigated area of demand. Now when price did this, all we did here, we had an internal pullback after this internal sell-off, and then from this point we came down, and at this point here our swing pullback was complete. So as I mentioned, here was our swing push to the top side. All of this was our swing pullback. Once we mitigated our area of discount and our demand zone, which is this candle here, we then started to do what? We started to push to the top side. So as it stands, what is price's objective at the moment? At the moment, price's objective is to create a new high and break above this high and close above this high, which we have not done yet. So once the pullback was complete here, this point here, and we start to shift to the into the next expansion phase, what we're doing is this: higher high, higher low. Now price is working its way up to create a new higher high, but we know within this expansion of a move to the top side, price isn't just going to move in one direction. What is it going to do? It's going to have a trend within this swing. So we can see we created this high, we had a pullback, we created this high. Now what are we in? We're in the next pullback phase, and after that pullback is complete, what can we expect? We can expect price to maintain an uptrend until it breaks and closes above this previous high, because there's nothing telling us that price is going to continue pushing to the downside longer term. The monthly is bullish, the weekly is bullish, the weekly pullback was complete. We now shifted in a weekly expansion phase to the top side. Within this weekly expansion, we have our daily swing structure, and the daily is currently in a pullback, and we have a key area where price can pull back to. After that, all time frames are in sync for price to continue pushing to the top side. So from a higher time frame perspective, my expectation is for price to continue pushing higher to break above this previous high. Now, I would only trade that with confirmation purely because, as I mentioned before, I'm just going to delete some of this stuff here just to clean up the chart. If we look here to the left, what did we discuss? We've had a previous break of structure here. Now, having that previous swing break of structure could clearly indicate that price at some point is going to enter a swing retracement, just the way it did over here. How many people when price headed back down, all the way down to like 1,050? Sorry, Red Dragon, can you just put your mic on mute? Thanks. When price headed back down to 1,050, how many people expected price then to create a new high and head back up to 2K? Not many people, but that was the technical pullback complete at this point in time. So if price comes back down into our current internal swing structure, so we're in our expansion move to the top side, which is here, we're expecting price to break above this previous high. You could see price created a higher high, higher low, higher high. We're currently looking to create a higher low. Now if price comes down here, and if price has a change of character at this point here, what is that telling us? That's telling us that this expansion to the top side, the internal trend has shifted bearish, which we shouldn't expect it to do. we should expect that internal trend to remain bullish until it achieves its objective, which is breaking previous swing structure. So if that happens, there's an early indication to then tell us that price no longer wants to continue higher and break above this. And what we're then looking at is we're then looking at something like higher high, higher low, lower high, lower low, which is what this pattern will end up being then. There's our higher low, higher high, higher low, lower high. Then eventually, if we get a break below this internal swing structure, then I'll be looking at price, looking to take out this previous swing structure. And at that point, my bias will shift, and I'm just going to delete this. And if then what I will be looking at is where's our major swing? Our lowest point is here, and our highest point is up here. If I now mark my Fibonacci tool from the swing low to the swing high, where does that lead us into? That would perfectly lead us into unmitigated areas of demand down at 1380 to 1340 with clear levels of imbalance. And at that point, if we shift here, I will be expecting price to maintain a daily trend to the downside until we get to this point, and then eventually shift to create that next impulsive push to the top side, just the way we did over here, which I explained in the beginning. But that's something which is not something that's on my radar at the moment until if and when structure shifts, then I have that expectation and that understanding of price action set. You know, you should never have a a one-sided bias and expect price just to push in one direction and just be very egotistic or I'm right and this is what I expect. No, look at the markets from both directions. Use your rules and your analysis and apply those to both sides of the direction because we shouldn't have a bias or care which way price is heading. Our job is to extrapolate profits from the market and just use our rules to understand whichever way it's heading, that's the direction that we will look at going. It's not anything personal that we should be looking at it when we're looking at the market. So hopefully you could see where we are and where we're trading. So now that I've explained we're currently in that expansion move to the top side, which is this current move over here. The goal is to break this previous high, which we're working towards, and within this we have our daily trend, which is our higher high, higher low, higher high. So if that's the case now, let's go drop down to the daily time frame. So if we now drop down to the daily time frame, we can see we had a daily breaker structure just over here. So after that daily breaker structure, what could we expect? We can anticipate a pullback. And that's what price is doing. Now, how do we anticipate that pullback? Our daily low to our daily high. Let's go down to a one time frame lower than that. So we could see where we had the daily breaker structure. After the daily breaker structure, we had 4-hour breaker structure to the top side. We had another 4-hour breaker structure to the top side here. We then had another 4-hour breaker structure to the top side here. And then we had a change of character over here on the 4-hour. That change of character indicated that price has now entered a daily pullback. And again, why can we expect price to enter a pullback? Once price creates higher high, higher low. Once we've created a higher high in an uptrend, what can we expect? We can expect a higher low to form, which is our pullback, before price then continues pushing up. So once we had this change of character here, similar scenario. What are we now expecting price to do? We're expecting price to head towards an area of discount before we see price then push into the top side. So currently, my expectation for price is to head down. Now, sometimes price can come just into this and then continue pushing higher, but we do have clear levels of imbalance and we do have demand at our extreme levels resting at like 1840, 1828 region. So I'm expecting price on a lower time frame to continue that bearish trend to the downside before we then shift. So if we currently look at our 4-hour structure, we had this huge push to the downside without any real pullback. We then came here. I'm just going to zoom into this slightly. So we came down here. We had this big push to the downside. We then came back here, and then from here, where was our next push? We had our next push to the downside here. So what we can see is where was our last 4-hour breaker structure? It was over here. Now within our 4-hour breaker structure, again, the way I kind of trade is I'm expecting the 15-minute trend to remain bearish until it creates a 4-hour breaker structure to the downside. So currently, if we look at this now, we've had a 4-hour breaker structure. The 15-minute trend has remained bearish, but what can we expect after a 4-hour breaker structure? We can anticipate a 4-hour pullback. Now, if I mark my 4-hour high to the current low, look what we can see perfectly that sits within this. We have a perfect unmitigated area of supply that sits perfectly here. But when am I going to expect price to head back up towards there? Well, I'm only going to expect price to head back up towards there if I now come down to the 15-minute and I'm looking at the current structure where we're currently within. So there's our 4-hour pullback region. Within this now, where's our last 15-minute breaker? So we had a M15 breaker structure here. Now, you could perfectly see, if we now look at where price is, within our, so we can expect a M4, H4 pullback to happen. If price heads back up towards, so if the M15 structure shifts, if price heads back up towards this is the region where I'll be expecting to continue shorting for the next 4-hour breaker structure to the downside. And whether price comes here and we get a 4-hour pullback, we do this. The only time I'll be expecting to head back up and expect the daily pullback to be complete is once the 4-hour has come into a point of interest and I see that shift. And there becomes my confidence for everything that I've spoken about, the weekly, the monthly, the daily. Everything then starts to align from a significant time frame, but we're not there yet, so I'm not really concerned about that. I'm looking at price where we are here and now. So there's my 4-hour region that I'm expecting price to pull back into. That's in a nice area of premium. If price heads back up there, that's where from a swing perspective I'll expect price to start shorting. But until we head back up towards that region, like I said, we have a 15-minute trend within that. So you could see we had our pullback, we then had this sell-off, we had that M15 breaker structure here. Now where did we react from? If I go to the hourly chart here, and I've got this marked. This is just a clean chart, so I'm just showing you guys on a clean chart. But if you go to the left here, you could clearly see here is demand. And I'm just going to take this all the way across. And you could perfectly see price bounced off of this demand zone. So if I go down to the 15-minute chart, here is our 15-minute high. There was the previous low. This is the lowest point that caused the M15 structure to break. So currently, what do we have? We have that M15 high, we have this M15 low. We mitigated into this area of demand. Now, this is purely why I didn't look for any shorts and price pulled back here. Not that I'm saying price isn't going to work its way down. It probably is, but it's counterintuitive for me to start selling into extreme demand zones. And when I know that M15 has had a break, this is our 5-minute structure within that M15. So where's our last internal breaker structure? We had an internal breaker structure here, and then we had an internal breaker structure here. So now, what's the probability that price is going to do next after an M15 breaker structure? We can expect an M15 pullback. So now, if I mark up my fib from the M15 high to the M15 low, look what sits within it perfectly. A perfect unmitigated area of supply. Loads of liquidity resting above these highs. So now, I can already see that price is starting to breach above this zone. So now, what's my next move? I'll expect price to head back into this region to start trading that M15 pullback. Because even though we've mitigated this demand, I'm not looking to short here because of what we've just discussed about the M15 and the M5, the internal breaker structure, and how supply has started to fail over here. And after that M15 break, I can expect that M15 pullback. So the next move really is price heading back here, look for some buys here, and then over here, will I sell aggressively? No. Why will I just not sell aggressively? Why will I not just take a short from here down into the next break, M15 breaker structure? Because of what I discussed in the 4 hour. Because we've had a 4 hour break of structure to the downside, we can expect the M15 pullback to have a change of character to trade the 4 hour pullback. Because again, if the 4 hours done this, 4 hours had a breaker structure to the downside over here, we can expect a 4 hour pullback, which is this what we're talking about here. So I'm not going to continuously trade the M15 structure to the downside because the M15 structure has achieved its objective. It's the trend within the 4 hour swing structure, and it's had a breaker structure to the downside, so we can expect a 4 hour pullback. So if a 4 hour pullback is going to come into play, then we're going to see the 15-minute internal swing structure change bullish. So why would I then be trading against the trend of what I'm expecting price to do, as well as the fact that price has reacted from a higher time frame area of demand, which is a perfect place for price to enter a higher time frame retracement before we can then see the next break to the downside. So all these things are significant and key when you're reading market structure, when you're seeing things from a higher time frame perspective, and when you're then going down to those micro time frames and looking at trading the markets internally. So that's what I'm expecting at the moment. I'm expecting price, what I've explained in the lower time frame, but from a slightly higher time frame, I'm expecting to see a retracement back into this region, then to see the next 4 hour break structure to the downside. Then maybe we see another pullback down into this demand, and then I'm expecting the 4 hour to shift and then continue higher. If the 4 hour doesn't shift bullish and we just come down, and like I said, we start to break through this region, then like I said, if we go back to the daily, then what am I expecting? Then I'm expecting price to break this daily low. Why am I expecting that daily low to break? Because of what we spoke about on the significant swing perspective. We had a swing breaker structure here, so we can then see price working its way down to here. But again, not focusing on that, focusing on there's plenty of trade opportunities of where we are currently for us to kind of worry about. Now, if I go into the markets of some of the trades that I kind of took, you could perfectly see based on what I was looking at. That's exactly what I did. You know, I understood this was the M15 high. I understood that was the low. Within this, now I'm not going to start going too much into my trades, but I could see where the change happened, and I started to perfectly trade within um, the structure of where I was expecting the market to go. And, back-to-back trades of like 4.2R, 6.3R. So within the same trading day, London session, NY session, perfectly caught trading opportunities to continue in the direction I was expecting the market to go in. Now, same thing happened today. Now, I took a counter trend trade. And again, I was out and I kind of mentioned it in Discord that this was probably going to be the selling position, but I didn't take that. I managed to trade the counter trend position, which was the pullback after the internal breaker structure here. So as we're breaking down in this M15, what do we get? We then get this move here. We then start coming back here. We then come down here. Now, once we've had a breaker structure here to the downside, and this was a perfect example here to kind of, whoever caught the short which was great, but you could see internally this was the high that caused the previous low here to break. So if we're going to continue internally bearish to mitigate this high time frame demand, then this is the high that shouldn't be broken. It's facts. This is what shouldn't be broken. So you could perfectly see that's exactly what happened. I saw lower time frame shift, so I traded the pullback after there was a breaker structure here. But this was perfect shorts here. Based on how, and I think Ancor got it and some other people got it. But this was perfect. If we mark the highest point here to the low here, look, perfect. Perfect move here. Price came back into that region, respected, closed within our area, respected that area of supply over here, back into that 50% of that GAN box, and the guys that are in the one-to-ones, they kind of know what I mean by that. And from there, you could see perfect breaker structure all the way down to that area of demand. And now, how many people who just trade pure supply and demand will just be looking at this and be like, ah, there's supply here. And as they get some sort of rejection over here, I'm just going to get rid of this range for a second. There's an area of supply here. How many people will just be induced in this and look at this over here and be like, oh, supply, look at that aggressive selling. As they see some sort of rejection here, they're entering on a short position here, probably just covering the highs and like, oh, we're bearish and let me just continue trading this down. And then eventually what happens? So trading supply and demand in isolation is I'm not saying it's not a profitable strategy, but it's not a high win rate profitable strategy. You must understand, why is the likelihood that supply is failing here? It's based on what we've just spoken about: structure, internal structure, high time frame structure, why that shift is gonna, why the likelihood of that shift happening on the M15 is, all of the reasons. Understanding why price is doing something is super super important, of having a detailed explanation of structure and internal structure. And once you can start mapping that out, you're then more likely to be on the right side of the market than the wrong side of the market. But just looking at lower time frame and just internal structure is going to yield you a very low probability trading system with not the best risk to reward and not the greatest win rate. Not saying it's not profitable, but the likelihood of it playing out is not going to be great. Is absolutely not going to be great. So that is why a stronger level of supply like this, like, what did we sell off here? I think it was like 130, more than that. It was 180 pips we sold off from this. But look, price breached that supply because, like I said, M15 achieved its objective. This was a 5-minute breaker structure. The likelihood of the 5-minute having a change of character back to the top side is absolutely plausible. Why? Because we've had an M15 breaker structure. So after an M15 lower low, lower high, and we create a lower low here, what can we expect the M15 to do? Create a lower high. So if that lower high is going to happen, we're going to expect lower time frame to shift. And like I said, if you map it out perfectly, you can clearly see there's my fib, there's my M15 high, there's the highest point, there's the lowest point that broke this structure. What do we see resting between it? We see a perfect unmitigated area of supply, lots of liquidity above here, and a area of imbalance slash fair value gap that people, whatever terminology they like to use. So the likelihood of price heading back up towards there is much higher than people just seeing this area of supply and being like, I'm going to continue shorting this. So that's my longer term intraday term and longer term analysis on gold from both expectations.